Hey, welcome to the Do Good Work podcast. Today we are talking to David Jones. David is the founder and CEO of the Talent Enterprise, a leading think and do tank focused on the elevation of human capital, integrating modern psychometric tools and assessment solutions with the latest advancements in artificial intelligence and data science. With over 30 years of human capital experience, David has worked with clients in more than 40 countries on a broad range of talent, leadership, assessment, performance, transformation, and inclusion projects. David is also experienced in various psychometric instruments and qualifies with the British Psychological Society at level A and B. And he is on the mission to make the labor markets more efficient using assessment technology to build self-awareness and promote more effective decision-making in people's careers. David, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Raul. Really pleased to be here. I know it's your morning, it's my evening, but it's good to connect. Thank you.
We make it happen, right? We're making it happen.
Yes, correct.
One thing that I want to start off with, and maybe we can start about defining what it is, why it's important, and how the behavior to be taken once we understand what we're talking about. I think those are the three logical steps of thinking. I really want to understand what is, if you can explain it in your terms, what is the science of behaviorometry? I'm trying to make sure that I dial that in well.
There's a lot of jargon. Maybe I'll start at the beginning and hopefully make it clear for you and for all the listeners. Behavior metrics is like the equivalent of psychometrics. Okay, so if psychometric assessments, these are standardized assessments, which are normally questionnaires, and they're asking for either your strengths or characteristics, your sort of personality preferences, or they could also ask you about some of your cognitive abilities, right? Like your numerical reasoning, your spatial reasoning, error detection, that type of thing. So the idea behind the science of behaviormetry and our company, the Talent Enterprise, which we started 10 years ago, is really to try and innovate beyond psychometrics. Psychometrics has been around for about 80 years, and it's very much based on the questionnaire, the survey.
Yep.
Right. So if you think about it from a sort of research perspective, the survey is very pervasive, right? I'm sure all of us have survey fatigue in terms of the number of questionnaires or forms that we're asked to complete in our working life and our personal life. And the survey throughout social science is acting as a proxy measure for the factor that you're looking to analyze, right? So if you're looking at somebody's resilience, if you're looking at their grit, their growth mindsets, their comfort with ambiguity, their risk appetite, all these type of factors that can sometimes be very relevant for entrepreneurs, for instance, okay? We have assessments that do exactly this. Then you can ask a whole bunch of questions, right, in a survey. Okay, and then you compare the person's results with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other people, and then you give them feedback that says, hey, Raul, you are high on this factor and you're very low on this factor compared to the average. These are your signature strengths, right? And you sort of help to build self-awareness and self-development. You can help them to make selection decisions. One of our visions at the Talent Enterprise is to improve the efficiency of labor markets. And like all markets, to make them efficient, you need better information, right? So the assessments come to play there. Behavior metrics is the sort of similarly statistically robust practice. So we have statistical validity, which is mostly about predicting behavior. We have statistical reliability, which is about the sort of consistency of people's responses over time. And then we generally have what we call stability of the factors themselves. So are they really measuring what you say they're measuring? So all of these same factors and robustness apply, but instead of using a survey or a questionnaire tool, what we're doing is we're saying, look, we don't want to use this proxy measure. We want to measure the behaviors directly.
Interesting.
If we can do that directly through a video interview, if we can do that directly with the way you behave on our assessment platform, our online assessment platform, or our website for the application, we will use those measures directly at the moment to augment what you say in the survey. But I think as the technology develops and as we get more and more data, then eventually to replace the questionnaire. So our big bet for the future is that within 10 years, 15 years for sure, I think the questionnaire will be dead in its current form, right? In terms of pervasiveness across all aspects of our life.
Yeah, I mean, let's dive into that and break that apart real briefly, but I have to ask the question because I think that when you take like the psychometric assessments, like I can take a test, and depending how I'm feeling that day, I can lean into being one psychographic or quadrant or disc
Sure.
assessment or whatever that I'm feeling, or maybe that I aspire to be, right? As
Yeah.
opposed to kind of taking a snap of how am I actually behaving or executing in this moment in time. Is that a good
That's right. Yeah,
delineation?
because we're all smart, right? And we take loads of surveys all the time. So
Yeah.
we very easily get an indication from the question what type of factors people are looking to measure, right? And so it is more possible to game or to predict what the right answer might be, particularly if you're looking for a particular role, right? If you're looking for a sales role, for instance, right, or an entrepreneurial type of position, or some sort of funding, right, and there's a questionnaire associated with that funding access, then you're the right answer, right?
Yeah.
That you've got to show that you are very innovative, you're someone who is comfortable with unpredictable, ambiguous situations, etc., right? So the right answer. Whereas if we're measuring somebody's behavior directly, then in some ways it's less transparent in terms of the assessment protocol, and therefore the authenticity of the response, which is one of the key measures that we're already using this methodology for, we can have a lot more confidence in that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You also mentioned that you use data science and AI. Where are we in that field? Because I know that they're leveraging AI for markets or for biology in terms of
Yes.
healing bodies and health. There's some interesting advancements on that side of the field. Where are we
Yeah.
in leveraging AI for, like you're mentioning, labor markets for efficiencies with our teams? And
Yeah.
when you leverage AI for your work, what is the extent that we can maybe even forecast behavior?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There's a couple of things, right? I would say in general, the short answer was I think we're in the infancy of using AI in this tool, or we should be, right? Because I think we have to be very cautious about the ethics of what we're doing. We have to make sure that the data sets that we're using, so if we're looking at leadership development, right, and we're using assessments for leadership development, many organizations today are very male, pale, and stale in their senior management hierarchy. So if we just use that data today, then we could be perpetuating that forever, right? So we don't necessarily want to have that inherent bias coming through. So we have to have large data sets, very clean data sets, very objective data sets. And that takes time, right? And you need literally hundreds of thousands of data points. So we have to be realistic about that and sort of get a little bit beyond the hype. I think also in my understanding of AI and our applications that we're developing, AI obviously is a very sort of attractive buzzword at the moment, but when you really get into it and you start to try and build applications, it's essentially statistics, right? There's a lot of algorithms that you build, and these statistics in many cases have been around for quite a long time, but the way that you build the algorithms and then the way you deploy them using technology is where the power and the scalability comes. So typically in psychometrics and behavior metrics, the standard, say for instance, for predictive validity, to go to your point about prediction, then normally a good standard is a coefficient in an algorithm of something like 0.7, right? So saying 70% of this factor can be explained by the way that Raul or anybody else answered this questionnaire. So for human beings, that's considered to be a good quality benchmark. Anything above that is obviously better. Anything significantly below that, you would really start to question, right? And there are many tools that are used today, psychometrics or the sort of infancy of behavior metrics, which are actually, when you probe into their coefficients for predictive validity in particular, they're really quite poor. And they're not meeting that sort of general standard. In terms of the other part of the question, where are we using AI now? So we're using it in proctoring. So obviously in the last few years, particularly accelerated in the last 2.25 years, a lot of our work has become entirely virtual, right? So we're doing a lot of online, gamified, virtual reality types of assessments. And so we can build in a layer on those assessments, which is what we call a proctoring layer. So the way that we use that at the Talent Enterprise, we have 13 different factors. I know this is an audio podcast, but we're on a video call right now. So we could have this AI layer on our video call now, right? We don't, so don't worry. But we could then, with the right protocols and with your permission, which you would need to give, but normally you would because you're applying for a job or you're applying for a leadership development program or a promotion, etc. We can see what other software does Raul have open on his laptop right now. Okay. Where is Raul's gaze? Okay. Does he seem to be looking at someone who might be behind the screen, right? Does he have, I don't know, Google open and he's like looking for questions, or he's searching for how do I answer this questionnaire or whatever else it might be.
Wow.
Are there shadows in the room? Is there someone else in the room? We can do identity checks, right? Is this really Raul, or is it Raul's brother or cousin who's got a PhD, right? Like this type of thing. So then with this type of technology, we can then give our clients a sort of risk factor, right? So we can say, hey, Raul performed like this in the assessment, and here's a risk factor analysis. So we can't say, was Raul cheating 100%, but we can say, look, there are several indications here that there may be high risk, that these are not really genuine results. And then the other area that we're really making great strides on today is this sort of authenticity or congruence measure. So particularly when we're using a traditional psychometric assessment and we're doing an online or a virtual or a gamified assessment in conjunction with that, we can then match the things that you said in the questionnaire about, I'm this type of person, I like this type of work challenge, I thrive in this environment. We can then judge how authentic your responses are to targeted questions or to probing questions based on that, right? So how you respond, where your eyes go when you're thinking of answering the question, how enthusiastic you are, how relaxed you are, et cetera, et cetera.
And even that last part too, like I know one of our teams, we just got like a revenue intelligence tool to measure voice inflections, but for the sales, and it does that. I don't think it goes all the way to measure eye. Maybe it does measure like where the eyes go, if they're telling a lie or telling the truth, but that's really interesting. No, you mentioned earlier, there's two components really about the efficacy of doing this type of work. Is it because you want to focus on having clean data sets to ensure that we have what is the best like diagnosis to become this type of leader for this industry in this type of work? Or is it more like, is it right to be able to go this far in terms of creating some sort of certainty for the workforce as opposed to giving people who have potential the opportunity to be a leader, for example?
Yes. No, that's a great question. So I think, our philosophy is, first of all, the data security and the data ethics around what we do have to be like unquestionable, right? So our headquarters is in Dubai. We work a lot in Europe, and we work a lot across Asia and increasingly in Africa, a little bit in North America. But our standard is the GDPR standard, right? So basically, we would say to you and to our clients, if you come and complete an assessment, whatever that might be, then this is your data, right? So if you want to request to see all of the data that we hold about you, then if you're a citizen of the European Union, we're legally bound to give that to you. But we would say that's our standard for everyone, right? So that's our policy. So sometimes there might be a time factor, so we can give up to 2 weeks to our client to give you a decision, whatever the outcome is that you're involved in with them, and then we will give you your entire data file. Okay. When it comes to data security, we follow in ISO International Standard 27001, which means we're not sharing your data with anyone. We're protecting your data. We're not letting it leak to some sort of marketing organization, or we're not selling your data to anybody, and making sure that it's not obviously vulnerable to hacking or to anything like that. Right. So that's really important. Then the other aspect that's really important, if again we're following this vision of making labor markets more efficient, then we have to give that information back to you, right? Again, depending on the protocols that we agree with our client, we would strongly encourage them to give you immediate feedback, okay? Without necessarily going into the statistics and doing like a full accreditation on the tool and all the jargon and everything. But we would say, hey, Raul, like, you just completed this assessment. Here are your top 3 strengths, and here's some suggestions as to things you might want to do to leverage those strengths, or situations that are more likely for you to thrive in, given the type of personality or preferences that you've indicated. And conversely, here's your bottom 3 strengths, or your top areas for development. Here's some situations that you might either want to avoid, or you might need to be aware that you could struggle in, relatively speaking, or you might want to take some action to expose yourself or to develop more skills in this area.
That makes a lot of sense. And what would hinder a team or a company from doing the tradition around doing the assessments versus doing this? Is there Is it the factor that it's new? They don't know if it's applicable to their teams, or are they using these type of behavior metrics for
Mm.
strategic hires, for director, VP roles,
Yeah.
senior roles?
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess we don't get to see those people that are hesitant about it. So we tend to deal with the people that want to use it. So I think the reason why they want to use it, often there's a sort of efficiency factor. So like if
Yeah.
you're an employer or if you're running like a mass recruitment type of campaign, right? So let's say you're doing like a graduate recruitment thing, right? And you're a very attractive company for graduates, right? Then sometimes we've got clients where in the first day that they release their campaign, they can get up to like 80,000 applications, right? So what we do is we help them efficiently and very sort of time efficiently as well to take those 80,000 people, give them a fair and objective assessment protocol. We can run obviously concurrently 80,000 no problem on our platform. We can give everybody feedback. We can make sure they have a positive experience, even if they're not selected, because they're getting feedback, guidance, and very quickly we can help the organization shortlist, right? So then there might be a second stage, which is maybe a more expensive virtual reality type of assessment, right?
Wow.
So then let's just say, I don't know, 2,000 people get to go into that, right? And then finally there might be, I don't know, 75, 80 people that are then having either a face-to-face or a screen-to-screen sort of video interview, plus maybe a mini case study, which we call a situational judgment test, or we're doing behavior metrics or some sort of work-based type of assessment, right? That's relevant to the job or the organization that they're applying for. So very quickly we can do that, right? So it helps our clients to differentiate their employer brand, differentiate their experience. Candidates get frustrated if they have to wait a long time. They get frustrated that they never hear anything. They don't get any feedback. They just get a sort of Dear John letter at the end. So it's actually, from a branding point of view, whether it's an employer brand or whether it's actually supporting their final product and service brand, it can be a very productive approach.
No, absolutely. And this kind of goes in line parallel to augmented reality or virtual reality, where I was hearing the founder of Oculus or the creator of Oculus say that I think it's within this decade that we'll be able to have like that headset on and we can have these same experiences flying from San Diego to Dubai and sitting in the same room. And I mean, we won't be able to have other experiences as detailed, like maybe going to see Yosemite, but still being able to sit in a fluorescent light room and being able to feel like we're in the same meeting room. It is happening. And this is also in line with that to shorten the gap of implementation speed and pretty much like you mentioned, create more efficiencies.
Yeah, I think again, it's still very early days. I think honestly, right now, I think probably the price point of virtual reality hardware is probably a little bit still high to make it really something which is going to take off immediately. So I don't know if that's going to change. I have heard, I was speaking to somebody from PwC, consulting company and the audit company. They said, I don't know how true it is, but it's sort of really stuck in my mind. They said that if you start with PwC today, then as part of your induction, you get 3 pieces of hardware, right? You get a corporate mobile phone, you get a corporate laptop, and you get a VR headset.
Huh. Wow.
Right. So you think, okay, that's really interesting, right? Because they're going for a total sort of a remote working type of approach or the flexibility to do that. I think it'd be interesting to see if like building furniture for IKEA is challenging, right? But like setting up, you have to set up a sort of domain for VR if you're doing that in your house. I don't know if you're doing in your home office or whatever, it could be challenging. It certainly would be for me, I think. But it was interesting, right? Like, I don't know how far and how fast this is going to go, but I think there are some areas where it really seems to be taking off.
Yeah, specifically for the work that you're doing, the organizations that you're helping, I think that efficiency play is parallel to what I'm seeing in the VR space. And I think that this is exciting to move forward. I think that the final question, really just to kind of get your insight, like what excites you most about the space that you're in and the future that you see this become like in the next, let's say 5 years?
Okay, no, that's great. So I think 10 years ago when we started the company, I think we saw the opportunity to be positively disruptive, right? So to be like the sort of psychometric, behavior metric punks, right, if you like, who were hopefully elevating the concept, right? At the time, and I still think today in many cases, it was very much considered like a publishing industry, right? So if you think about all the other publishing industries that we're familiar with in the consumer aspect, right? Whether it's books, music, video, TV, etc., right? Then they've changed dramatically, right, over that same time period, right, in terms of how we buy and consume, how that content is packaged, right? It's much more consumer focused now than publisher focused, how it used to be.
Mhm.
In the psychometric assessment industry, it was much more anachronistic, right? It was like fixed content. Here's a bunch of sort of really mini exams, right? Like each element is going to take you at least half an hour. So if you do this full battery of personality plus 3 or 4 aspects of cognitive assessments, this is going to take you 2.5, possibly 3 hours to complete, right? And the business model was, you just tell us how much you want to buy, and it's fixed content, right? We're not going to customize it in any way. We're not going to do any personalized or organization specific data analysis. It's just buy them and that's it. Thank you very much. So we wanted to really disrupt that aspect of it and really say, look, we want to squeeze the juice out of this data. We want to give as many additional insights from metadata, from the direct measurement of behavior, as we discussed before. We want to give you organizational comparison groups or benchmarks. We want to give you industry benchmarks. We give as many benchmarks as possible to our clients. So it could be global, regional. We want to make sure everything's available in your own native language, and you can choose what languages. If language isn't the subject of the assessment, you can choose which language you want to use it in. So we really try to follow what we're seeing in the consumer market inside the sort of B2B market, right? When I think B2B software and B2B experiences always seem to lag in the consumer market. So our platform is called Lighthouse, and it's very much designed to look and feel as much as possible. It's not quite as slick. We don't have that much money, but it's designed as much as possible to be like a Netflix of assessments, right? So it's like a card structure, it's personalized, it's a sort of journey. It helps you to sort of interact and ask questions. So that's really what we wanted to do, and that's what's really excited us. And having some success in that and seeing the opportunity for more progress, I think, is what keeps us engaged and motivated. I think the future in this space in particular is that I think, like I said, there's a few things, right? Like questionnaires, I think, will be dead fairly soon. I think also the sort of assessment, whether they're psychometric or behavior metric or using AI, I think they'll become much more pervasive. And they already are, right? So we're talking about using them in the talent space, right? So identifying people for different careers, different jobs, giving them feedback, improving their performance, etc. But already you're seeing this sort of thing in many other similar domains where you're looking either to predict behavior or you're looking to match individuals either with other individuals or with organizations, right? So things like if you're applying for a loan, right, then you're starting to see that there are some questions in the application which actually psychometric questions which are predictive, right? And they're trying to predict, like, what type of person are you? Are you conscientious, right? Are you being consistent in your answers, right? Or are you somebody who's just like trying to represent a certain image of being a reliable customer who's going to pay all the money back, right? Same with insurance, same on dating platforms, right? Same on all sorts of aspects where hopefully it can be a win-win situation, right? That using this more sort of powerful predictive analytics can be good for the organization, but also good for the individual. Again, I think the ethics of this are really important, but I think we're going to see it's much more pervasive for sure.
It's really cool to see it cross industries, but then also I like the fact that you always look for the win-win. How does this affect the business, like the business case, the business use, but also the end user in their experience with it, to make sure that they get the, like you mentioned, the feedback for their future actions that they'll take.
And we call ourselves a think and do tank, right? So we love the data, we love the analytics, right? But at the end of the day, we're pragmatic people, right? We've got to have applications or interventions. Right? So another great application very quickly is there's this thing called gait analysis, right? So again, I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with things like employee engagement or surveys like that go on in organizations, right? So you can ask lots of questions about people, about how they feel about their work or what motivates them in their work. But you can also, in a suitably public place, you can deploy a camera. Okay, so let's just say like in your reception of your office, right? Or in the main floor of the office or in the main floor of the factory, right? And you can do gait analysis, which is not like gait, like your sort of garden gait, but what the rhythm and the cadence and the pattern of your walking is. Okay.
Oh, really? Interesting.
This analysis can give you an indication of how that person is feeling. Okay. If you can do this again in a sort of ethical and open way, you can plan an intervention for this person, right? Like just how a manager would have when we were all, I don't know, 2.25 years ago, working face to face or working in direct teams, would have said, hey, Raul, you're not looking great today. What's happening? Let's have a little side discussion. You know, what happened? Are you just tired, or you had a party last night, or you had a argument with someone at work or at home or whatever, right? It can help you to make an intervention, right? You can see or predict in order to try and improve people's experience in the workplace.
I really love the fact that you actually care about the ethics and the use case for this, because with that much data in the wrong hands or with the wrong intentions, it can actually be negative work experience, and being able to create positive outcomes for team members.
It's very risky, right? So if you get it right, it can be very beneficial. If you get it wrong, then it can be very counterproductive, right? And the law around this is still not clear, right? So if you look at most people's employment contracts, it's like a rental agreement, right? Somebody's agreeing to pay you a certain amount per hour or per day or per month, whatever your type of contract is. And they're saying, look, we're going to rent your time, okay? And you're going to perform these functions, right? But when it comes to ownership of data, okay, some employment contracts would say, look, everything you do while you're working for us that generates data, that belongs to the company, right? Mm-hmm. But the analysis and the applications from that data is not so clear, right? So I think you have to be open, whether depending on the legal situation or the union representation or the works council representation, whatever the situation might be. It's just good practice to say, hey, look, we want to do this, and this is what we think are the benefits, and we're going to report what we're finding.
No, absolutely. So much complexity in there, and so much to like. And also when you're vetting potential clients as well, I'm pretty sure that's part of the vetting process and the education on that. But David, for our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to, one, thank you for this episode, and two, learn a little bit more about what you're up to?
Thank you. No, thank you very much. So if people want to find out more about the work we do at the Talent Enterprise, then they can go to thetalententerprise.com, our website. There's lots of information, resources. We've got research papers. There's some more detail about our products and services. You can get samples, etc., etc. You can check that out. And if you want to contact me, then you can do that through email at david@thetalententerprise.com. And if there's any questions that you have or any feedback, I'll be happy to field that.
We'll put the links for the website on the show notes, David. It's an honor to have you on. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Raul. Appreciate it.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.